Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Liam squinted, looking up at the large building. He couldn't believe this was where he worked now. At this prestigious and cool firm, one of the coolest firms in town. So what? That he only got a job here as a courier. What's the big deal? The most important thing is that he has a job now. He's not a bum. He's gonna work and get a real paycheck. That's the coolest thing that's happened to him lately. And that's because he's not mine. And getting a job is very difficult for him. Nobody wants to get involved with a man who can't talk. I happen to be Greek, born so unusual. He grew up a perfectly adequate, smart, and intelligent child. Except that speech was inaccessible to him. No one really took any trouble to deal with the kid's problems. In childhood, he was taken a couple of times to the hospital, to the diagnostic center to conduct some examinations. His mother told him that no one could determine the cause of the strange dumbness. And everyone just accepted the fact that they would never hear his voice. Liam did very well in school. His dumbness did not prevent him from graduating with excellent grades, but that's only because he studied in the village. But he couldn't get into the institute. Everyone turned him down. No one could imagine how a mute guy would study in a higher educational institution. So he was left without a higher education. What are you standing there for? You think the papers will take you where you need to go? Liam jerked at the unpleasant voice that came from right above his ear. It was Michael, his immediate superior. He was only the deputy head of the department. But in front of Liam, he was acting like a big shot. For some reason, he immediately disliked the guy. Probably Liam annoyed him with his kindness, politeness, and smile. Liam smiled at everyone. Michael only smiled at his bosses. Don't you realize what you're doing? God, how hard is it with you? Michael was starting to lose his temper. Liam smiled and signaled that he was leaving. Michael pretended not to understand him at all. What? What are you explaining to me? You know I don't understand your gesticulations. How could you get hired? I never thought this firm could hire retards. Liam had a smile on his lips. He couldn't, and he wasn't going to prove that he wasn't a moron at all. He understood that Michael just wanted to humiliate him, to insult him, to offend him. But I had long ago learned not to pay attention to people who considered him inferior, stupid, or weak-minded. Anyway, he could not prove anything to such people. Working in this firm for 2 months, I became convinced that the richer and more successful a person, the more disdainful he treats anyone who is any different from him. Well, you're gonna be rushing me for a long time. Are you going to go? Michael grinned contemptuously. Liam nodded and started down the stairs. Behind him, he heard Michael say in a low voice, "What an asshole, and I want something from him." Liam got into the car and drove away. Michael stayed standing and stared at the passersby. Ethan sat the whole way, closing his eyes only when the driver stopped in front of a building. He sighed and opened his eyes. "Thank you, Benjamin. Wait for me at the usual time this evening. If I'm late, I'll call you." Ethan sighed again and got out of the car. When Michael saw his boss, he perked up and put a polite smile on his face, which he thought was sincere. "Ethan, good morning. How are you doing? I hope all is well." Ethan sighed for the 3rd time and smiled politely. "Good, Michael. Everything is fine. Did you send the documents and the package?" Michael nodded. The smile never left his face. He tried to show his bosses what a responsible and irreplaceable worker he was, who could always be relied on and entrusted with any task. Of course, everything was done to the best of his ability. Ethan nodded contentedly. "Good. The documents should reach their destination tonight at 10 o'clock. This is very important to us. We need that contract." Michael opened the door of the building, letting the boss step forward. Of course, everything will be delivered. I personally saw to it myself. You can always count on me." "Ethan." Ethan nodded and headed for his office. Michael stood in the lobby for a few more minutes, looking around and analyzing how many people had seen him talking to the chief. It would be nice if everyone thought that the boss was giving him some individual assignments. That would be just fine. It would give him even more importance. Michael hummed and went into his office. Going through the papers on his desk, he whistled some kind of tune to us. The day had started out just fine today. He ran an important errand, talked to the boss. Showing off for his coworkers, what could be better? Michael picked up a folder and froze. His hands trembled. He turned pale. God, no, not this. How could it be? After a minute, Michael woke up and quickly opened a desk drawer. He put the folder in the drawer and immediately closed it. Michael frowned and stood up to close his office door, then leaned his back against the door and looked at the chair in horror. How on earth did this happen? It couldn't be. Michael locked the door with the key and slowly walked over to the desk. He carefully sat down in the chair and opened the desk drawer. Taking out a folder from there, he looked at it with undisguised horror. No, this is just unbelievable. I'm finished. The end of my career, everything I've accomplished. It's all gone. He's not just gonna fire me, he's gonna kill me for this. It was the same project folder that was supposed to be on their potential client's desk at 10 o'clock today, whose future contract was so important to Ethan. And that folder was left lying on his desk. He was supposed to put it in a box, seal it, and send it off with a courier. He didn't. He just sent the customer an empty box. And now at 10 o'clock, the customer's gonna open the box and take out nothing. He's not gonna get anything because there's nothing in there. And it's Michael's fault. He set up his boss. They won't get that customer and they won't get a lucrative contract. And for that, I'm just destroyed. It's over. Everything I've accomplished, it's all just gone to shit, whispered Michael. He continued to stare at the ass for a few more minutes. But then his face unraveled and a slight smile appeared on it. He had an idea. Nothing is over. I'll fix it. He took the papers out of the folder and tore them up. Then he opened his briefcase and folded the papers into a secret pocket that zipped shut behind the lining. Michael was a scary person. The kind of person best not to run into. He decided to shift all the responsibility for this act to another person, namely the courier. No one knows the box was empty. He told everyone that he sent the documents with the courier. When it is discovered that the documents did not reach the customer, Michael will blame it on the courier. This fool won't even understand anything and won't even be able to justify himself, and no one will understand him. He doesn't know how to talk. That's what he'll do. Michael, having calmed down and gotten himself under control, went about his daily routine. 10:00. The boss's office door swung open abruptly and he yelled. Everyone in the building seemed to hear him. Where's Michael? Get me the delivery supervisor. Now, walking into his boss's office, Michael prepared to make his excuses. Ethan was paged. What happened? Ethan pounded his fists angrily on his desk and yelled, You told me you sent the documents to the customer. Why didn't they get to him? If you don't give me an adequate explanation, I don't know what I'm going to do to you. Do you have any idea how important that was? Michael. Well, his face took on an amazed expression. How? I did. I personally checked the paperwork several times before I sealed the envelope. That can't be right. I personally handed the box to the courier. How could that happen? He didn't have time to bring the documents to the customer. Ethan banged his fist on the table again. He did, but the documents weren't there. The customer is furious. He thinks I personally insulted him. He doesn't want to do business with me anymore. How could that happen if you personally sent the courier with the package? Where did the documents go? Michael prepared to carry out his plan. He shook his head reproachfully and sighed. I knew I shouldn't have hired him. I felt he was strange. I had a bad feeling about him. So I don't know what you mean. Explain? Yeah, it's about the delivery guy. I had a feeling he wasn't right. I'm 100% sure he's the reason the paperwork didn't get to the client. He was probably sent by someone and he just stole the documents and sold them to our competitors. I was suspicious of him from the start. I didn't like him. I was against him being hired. Maybe he's pretending to be mute, but he's not really mute. That's also possible. No one checked him out. He didn't show any documentation that he was sick, and they just took his word for it. I'm sure it's his fault the documents didn't get to our clients. Ethan looked at the employee with amazement. He realized who Michael was talking about. Yes, he knew that a mute courier had been hired. He'd seen the guy in passing and felt sorry for him. Besides, he'd been told that the guy was smart, savvy, and the fact that he couldn't talk didn't affect his intelligence at all. Ethan decided to give the guy a chance to prove himself. Turns out it was for nothing, so his competitors tried to send the guy to hurt his firm. So what's Ethan gonna do to end this quickly? He's not going to be nice to the people who betrayed him. Call him to me quickly, so that in a minute he would be in my office sullenly, he said to Michael. As Michael left the office, his face, a smile screamed. Well, did the plan succeed? All responsibility shifted to the courier. Michael kept his dignity, his workplace, his reputation, and his career will now be blown to smithereens by his boss, and he will disappear from the firm. Maybe he'll even go to jail. How clever of Michael to turn the situation in his favor. Liam was found 5 minutes later. When he arrived at the supervisor's office, Ethan yelled at him. You've only been on the job for 2 months. How dare you harm me and my firm? You thought I wouldn't find out. You are sorely mistaken. I'm an excellent judge of character. I knew. Right away you were the culprit. Liam was in shock. He looked at his boss with wide-open eyes, naturally silent, and didn't even realize what the matter was. Why are you silent? You don't have to pretend anymore. I know very well that you can talk. Say something for yourself, Ethan said. Liam shook his head. So you keep saying you're not mine. Liam nodded. Okay, you don't want to talk, so you keep standing your ground. Have it your way. Just explain to me why you stole the documents. Who did you sell them to? That you were promised $1 million for them? Liam was even more surprised. He spread his hands and shook his head. What are you trying to say? What are you trying to explain to me with your gestures? Do you want me to believe that you didn't steal the documents? Didn't you? Are you saying you didn't steal them? Ethan asked. The guy shook his head. He was upset and scared. Liam realized that he would not be able to justify himself. He couldn't even say anything to justify himself. What's going to happen to him next? What are these important documents? Why is the boss claiming he stole them? He just drove the packages. He didn't steal anything. He didn't sell anything to anyone. Ethan stared at the guy for a few minutes. He scrutinized him closely, trying to figure out if the guy was lying or not. But he couldn't find any confirmation that the guy was lying. What did I realize? There's no point in talking to you. You know, I could call the police. We have a trial. Find out if you can talk or just pretend to be mute. But I won't do that. I'm gonna let it stay on your conscience. You sabotaged a big deal for me. The firm lost a lucrative client. It's all your fault. Let that be on your conscience, and you'll pay for what you did. It's gonna come back to you in a boomerang. You're fired, you can walk away, and you won't get paid for your time. Get out of my sight so I don't see you again, Ethan said and sat down in a chair with his eyes closed. Liam paid the house to the door as his back touched the cool surface. He opened the door and stepped out quickly. As he walked down the hallway, all the employees were pointing and grinning at him. And Michael stood at the exit of the building. When the guy passed him, he said, "Shame on you. You were trusted, and you did that, so you should be ashamed." Liam glanced at Michael and then walked away. When Liam got into the car, his hands were shaking. Why had things happened like this? He just wanted to work, wanted to do his job, but he wasn't allowed to. What was he charged for? Yeah, he'd better never come to this town again. He's going home. Ethan was at work until late in the afternoon. He called his driver several times, delaying his arrival. It was already 8 p.m. When Ethan finally got off the paperwork, he started to lose his eyes inside. And then he remembered something. Oh my God, I have to be at the restaurant at 9 and I should have made a date for tonight. What kind of bad luck is that? Ethan glanced at his watch and shook his head slightly. If he left right now, he'd have time to go home and change. And he needed to change. He couldn't show up at a restaurant like this. Adriana wouldn't understand. The sweat stains on his shirt told him that Ethan had had a very busy day. He got up from his desk, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the office. Without saying goodbye to the guard, he walked quickly to the car. Everyone in the back seat, Benjamin told the driver. "Come on, hurry up. I have to be on the other side of town at 21 o'clock." Benjamin drove him home quickly. In 15 minutes, Ethan had time to shower and change his clothes. As Benjamin drove him to the restaurant, Ethan stared out the window thoughtfully. How could he be sick of being alone? He was 40 years old and he still hadn't found a family, couldn't find his happiness. He was always dating. It used to be more frequent, not so much now. Every time he met someone, he was convinced that no woman interested him. Yes, he had connections. A few times he'd even dated women for months at a time, one he was going to marry. But none of it was true. They all wanted something from Ethan, and he just wanted to be loved for what he was. Probably wanted a lot of things. He was almost certain by now that it was impossible to find a man who would love unselfishly. But he continued to meet women, to go on dates, hoping that he was wrong. All evening with Adriana talking nonstop. She tried to attract Ethan's attention to herself, but with each of her next phrases, Ethan was convinced that this is absolutely not the woman he would be interested in seeing next to him. Not only that, but he doesn't even want to meet her anymore. This girl claimed to be in her 30s, but Ethan was pretty sure she was only in her 20s. Why would she lie to him? Well, online dating should definitely be eliminated from the dating arsenal. Apparently, Adriana expected them to go to Ethan's house after the restaurant. She'd hinted to him that she wasn't opposed to intimacy, and she was wearing a very revealing dress. Her breasts were sticking out. Ethan realized with disgust that a good plastic surgeon had worked on the girl's appearance. It seemed like the skin on her breasts was about to burst, so tight was it on those round balls. And she painted, such with red lipstick, which glistened very much and constantly licked them invitingly, looking at Ethan. By the end of the evening, Ethan realized he couldn't take it anymore. When his new acquaintance realized that he wasn't going to take her to his place, she was mortally offended. Her face became so funny with anger. Ethan could barely contain his laughter. He put the girl in a cab, paying the driver. Adriana didn't even say goodbye to him. That was fine. It's no big deal. She wasn't very well-mannered either. Ethan called the driver. As he waited for him, standing in front of the restaurant with his hands in his pants pockets, he thought about how tired he was. Tired of the problems of being alone, of these endless dates. He just wanted some peace and quiet, and someone who could be there for him and just care about him. At least just to listen. Ethan came home and heard a complaining tag. "Nah, kitty, I forgot to feed you." "Sorry, buddy." His cat muzzled against his legs in frustration, fed the cat, and then reached into the fridge. There was no food in here. He hardly ever ate at home. There was a bottle of whiskey, though. Ethan sighed, pulled out the bottle, took a glass, and went into the hall. He dug out the bottle, poured himself half a glass, and took a few sips. He leaned back on the couch and closed his eyes. Finally, he was home in silence. After a couple of minutes, the cat jumped into his lap. Ethan smiled slightly and stroked the cat by the snout. "You know, kitty, today was a very bad day. I haven't had one in a long time. I had a big deal fall through. Yes, a very big deal. I also fired an employee and went on a date. And it was one of the worst dates I've been on in a while. Would you have seen her? I'm sure you would have been scared." "I was a little scared myself, to be honest." Ethan smirked. He talked to the cat while continuing to drink. After a while, his glass was put down, and he poured himself a fresh drink. Some time passed. It was late at night, and Ethan was slightly relaxed from the alcohol he had drunk. He kept talking to the cat, telling him about his problems and worries. He just needed to talk out loud. The cat lay on his lap with his eyes squeezed shut. Sometimes his tail nodded, as if to show that he agreed with his master. "You know, kitty, you're so happy. You don't have any problems. Or if you do, it's just one. When I forgot to feed you. But if you knew how hard it is to live in the human world, It's a good thing you're just a cat. My favorite cat is the only creature that is always by my side. And I have no one else. If I had known that my life would turn out this way, I would have tried to do things differently. If I could, I would have done things differently. But honestly, I just couldn't do anything. Everything was out of control. Ethan sighed and fell silent. He set the glass down on the table because his hand couldn't hold it anymore. He closed his eyes and traveled back 20 years. To the time when it all happened, when his life changed dramatically, to the time when he met his only beloved, the one who stole his heart forever. William had turned 20 years old that day. They were celebrating a friend's birthday, almost sleeping for hours until morning. The guys decided to go for a rest in the park. They sat at a table in a cafe. They ordered a glass of beer and talked about something. Then Noah said that it was boring, we should do something. William smirked. He was bored. But yesterday was fun. My head's still buzzing. How much did I drink last night? I wonder. Ethan looked around at the people walking in the park. His gaze fell on two girls who were sitting on a bench near the cafe. One of them was so beautiful that he was immediately interested. Why don't we have some fun? The boys said Ethan. And what do you suggest? Asked William. Ethan nodded towards the bench. Look, you see, there are two pretty girls sitting there. We should hook up with them. I'll bet you a blueberry over there. Ah, to the sea for once. His friends look out. William said sadly. No, I'm not up for it today. My head is buzzing, so I can't even talk to them. And Noah said, what's in it for you? I'd like to do a little modesty and hook up too. Pretty girl. Ethan shook his head. No, it's my idea, so I picked the victim. I'm smart. If you want to hook up with Betty. Noah shook his head. No, I don't like Betty. Okay, then let's make a bet. So what's the bet? Ethan smiled. A bet. I can get her to walk with me in 15 minutes, and she'll leave her friend on the bench and come with me. Noah smirked. No, you won't. Look at her. She looks modest, pretty, but she's modest. She won't go with you. I can tell you're a womanizer. After 5 minutes, Ethan got up and went to the bench. As he left the cafe, he turned and winked at his friends. Noah and William watched him carefully. Ethan walked over to the bench and smiled. The girls looked at him in surprise. Hi, we haven't met by chance before, Ethan said. White-haired. She said indignantly. No, we haven't. I would have remembered you. What kind of stupid phrase is that? We haven't. You could have used something a little more clever. Don't interrupt us. Young man, Ethan kept his eyes on her hair. God, how beautiful was she. And her eyes so naive and innocent. She stared at Ethan without even blinking. He had the impression that he was drowning in her eyes. They stared at each other, uninterrupted, for about a minute. Then the white-haired man did. Looking at both of them, I said, What's going on? Have you forgotten I'm here? Let's get out of here. I don't like it here. Kathy, Ethan said quietly, looking at the dark hair. The girl nodded. Yes, Kathy. And my name is Ethan. Nice to meet you, the girl replied with a smile. Would you like to take a walk with me? Kathy? Asked Ethan. Finally, Kathy blinked a few times, then looked pitifully at her friend. What's that supposed to mean? Replied the white-haired Christina. You're not getting around? Asked Kathy. Christina shook her lips and sighed. Then looked at her watch, shifting her gaze to her friend. She replied, No, I won't take offense. I have to go out with you guys soon anyway. Okay, naughty. White-haired. She looked sternly at Ethan and said if anything happens to her, I will get you out from under the ground. You got me, Ethan? Ethan, not looking at Christina, just nodded. She'll be fine. I promise, he replied. Christina nodded satisfied and left. Ethan and Kathy walked late into the night. They talked nonstop. Ethan learned that the girl is a round girl, an orphan with no one. She lives in a small apartment that she inherited from her grandmother. She had no family. She was all alone in the world, only her friend. Christina she didn't even have any friends anymore. Ethan completely forgot about his argument, forgot about his friends. He was completely absorbed in communicating with this incredible girl, whom he fell in love with at first sight. It was like he'd found his soulmate, so they started dating. Their love grew so strong that they were both shocked. William and Noah laughed at their friend all the time, teasing him, but Ethan paid no attention. Then his friends realized they were serious and stopped teasing him. Ethan introduced Kathy to his friends. After introductions, William and Noah recognized that the girl was really nice. Things were different with Kathy. She was very skeptical, constantly warning Kathy to be careful. Make sure you don't get in trouble. I don't trust him, no matter how much he hurts you. If you sleep with him, make sure you use protection, or he'll make you a baby and leave you. You'll whine about it later. Christina, what are you talking about? He's very nice. I love him very much, and he loves me. We're good. He'll never leave me, I'm sure of it. We're using protection. Don't worry. Christina shook her head doubtfully. Oh, you knave fool. I'm just warning you. You'll see for yourself. I wish you happiness. I'll be glad if you're doing well, but I'm just warning you not to get burned. Kathy comforted her friend as best she could. She was sure she and Ethan would be in love for the rest of their lives, and the guy believed it too. They dated for a few months. Then Ethan's parents saw them together. Ethan invited Kathy to a restaurant. The girl refused at first. She didn't have anything decent to wear to the restaurant. But Ethan solved this problem with ease. She just dragged Kathy to the store and bought her some clothes. Kathy absolutely refused to try anything on. But then Ethan said, if you don't take at least a few dresses now and try them on, I'm going to get down on my knees in the middle of the store and beg you. Kathy grimaced. Don't you dare. Then pick out something for yourself, and please go to the example. He bought her 3 magnificent dresses. Kathy tearfully thanked her lover. She had never had such beautiful dresses. No one has ever treated me like you have. I love you, she said. Boys. And I love you, my baby, Ethan replied. They arrived at the restaurant, where Ethan had made a reservation in advance. They had already gotten dessert when his parents entered the restaurant. They too had made reservations at this restaurant. Jacob pulled back a chair for his wife to sit comfortably. Sarah looked at her husband with a smile. It's been so long since I've been here. Thank you for inviting me today, Jacob smiled and kissed his wife's hand. I'm glad we could get out. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked around, her gaze settling on the couple sitting 3 tables away from them. After a while, she said, Jacob, look, and nodded toward that table. Jacob turned and looked where his wife was pointing. There sat their son with a girl. They were whispering about something, and Ethan was holding the girl's hand. Jacob, do you see the way he's looking at her? Clara asked. Jacob just nodded. They continued to look at their son. Ethan looked away from Kathy and looked around the room and saw his parents. The smile fell off his face. He turned slightly pale. Then he looked at Kathy. The girl kept saying something and smiling. Ethan did not expect to see his parents here. He wasn't going to introduce Kathy to them anytime soon. But he had serious intentions. He planned for that introduction to happen in the future. If this situation happened now, then it was time. Ethan believed in signs. He believed that since his parents were here, it would be a good time to introduce Kathy to them. Ethan looked over his beloved with pride. She was incredibly beautiful. Her new dress looked so good on her today. His parents were sure to like her. Then at home, he would tell them how much he loved her and wanted to marry her. He was sure that Kathy could win their favor. She was well-mannered, modest, and very fond of him. Ethan was happy that he had met her on his way. She was his other half. Kathy, there's someone I want you to meet. It's completely out of the blue. I didn't plan it, but I'm glad it happened. Don't be afraid. Just act natural, like you always do. I know you'll be worried and you'll tell me you're not happy. But it's better this way. He stood up and held out his hand to the girl. She trustingly put her palm in it, and he led her to his parents. Already approaching the table, Kathy realized who it was and turned slightly pale. Jacob was watching his son carefully. He kept his eyes on the girl. Hello, Daddy. Hello, Mom. I didn't expect to meet you here today. but I'm very glad we met. There's someone I want you to meet. This is Kathy, my girlfriend." Kathy smiled welcomingly, though it was hard for her to do so. She didn't get a smile back. Jacob realized that his wife was not going to greet the girl, so he took matters into his own hands. "Hello, Kathy. Perhaps you'd like to sit with us." "Yes, I guess we'll sit for a few minutes," replied Ethan, looking arrested. Kathy sat down carefully and looked at her boyfriend's mom. Clara watched every movement of her son's girlfriend. Finally, she uttered, "Hello, Kathy. My name is Slaga. I can't say. It's a pleasure to meet you because this is all too sudden for me." Jacob coughed. Then he asked his son, "And how long have you two been dating?" Kathy wanted to answer something, but Ethan beat her to it long enough. Clara noticed the way Kathy blushed. The woman frowned and then asked, "Have your parents met Ethan yet this time?" Kathy turned pale. She looked straight into Ethan's mom's eyes and answered boldly, "I have no parents. I'm an orphan." There was silence. Clara looked at her husband. Jacob shook his head faintly, but Slaga did not pay attention to it. She smiled sweetly and said, "Then I understand." Ethan looked at his mom and asked, "What you understand?" "Mom." Slaga looked lovingly at her son and replied, "Affectionately nothing, dear. Don't pay attention. You probably still want to sit together for a while, don't you? Then go back to your table. We won't keep you any longer." From the tone of his mother's voice, Ethan realized they had better leave. He took Kathy's hand, said goodbye to her parents, and led her to their table. "Did I say something wrong?" worriedly Kathy asked. Ethan smiled at his girlfriend. "No, my love. It's all right. You behaved very honorably. I'm proud of you. It's just that my mother, she's a complicated person. Not everyone can relate to her. She talks to everyone like that. It's okay." For the rest of the evening, Ethan kept glancing at his parents. He noticed that his mother didn't look at them once more. What did that mean? His mother had no interest in Kathy at all. She was nothing to her. That Ethan would prove to his parents that he was serious. They would have to accept that he wanted to be Kathy. They'll accept her. They'll have to accept her. Ethan and Kathy left before the parents. Slyara noticed them leaving. She squinted. Another look at her son's girlfriend. Jacob noticed the way his wife looked at the couple. He took Slaga's hand and told you not to mind them. It's a young thing. I don't think it's serious. Let our son have all the fun he wants. The time will come and he'll come to his senses. But Clara shook her head. "No, darling. I don't think so. I don't like the whole thing. Did you see the way they looked at each other? I know that look. We need to keep a close eye on our son. We can't miss the moment he gets out of our control. That girl has had a profound effect on him. I've noticed Ethan was different for a long time, but I thought he was just growing up. However, now I see that this girl is the reason why our son has changed so much. I don't like it at all. You have to control the situation, dear. Otherwise, things may not go the way we want them to. We'll talk to your son today or tomorrow. I hope you'll be on my side. We don't want a girl with no family, no money. That's not what I wanted for my son. He's an orphan. She'll drag him down." Jacob sighed. His wife is probably right. They need to take matters into their own hands. When the parents met their son in the kitchen the next morning, she immediately told him, "Ethan, I didn't say anything to you yesterday. I want to make it clear to you that I don't like that girl. I think you should stop talking to her. It's not going to do you any good. I hope you listen to what we have to say, as you always have. You're not a child anymore, not even a teenager. You have to think about your future. This girl shouldn't get in your way. What makes you think she's going to get in my way? Mom, I'll be honest with you. I love her. I'm not going to end things with her. I'm fine with it. And I'm serious. If you'd agreed to get to know her better, you'd realize that Kathy is a wonderful girl, and she'd make the best wife." Clara raised her eyebrows upward. "A wife? What kind of wife? First of all, it's too early for you to be thinking about marriage. Secondly, this girl is completely unsuitable for you. I don't want you to talk about such serious things. I don't want to hear about it, Ethan. We didn't raise you to give you away to the first girl we saw who took a fancy to you. She just wanted the good life. Don't you get it? She's not going to miss her chance. Ethan waved his hand irritably. Mom, what are you talking about? It's not what you say it is. You just don't know Kathy. She loves me and I love her. And we're gonna be together. You can't change that. There's nothing you can do. I've already made up my mind, and I'm not going to discuss it. How do you talk to your mother? Jacob said sternly. Jacob, don't judge him. Let him talk to me as he likes. I'm an enemy to him. He thinks I mean him harm. He doesn't realize that he is the most important thing I have in my life. And I care about his future, said Clara. Ethan chuckled bitterly. Are you the one who cares about my future? Dictating your terms to me. Deciding for me what I should do. Enough. I don't intend to follow your lead anymore. This is my life. I want to live it as I choose, as I see fit. You'll have to accept that. Kathy's part of my life. She and I are going to be together, and I'm going to propose to her, whether you want to or not. He turned around and walked out. Clara made a vague sound. She covered her face with her hands. For several minutes, the woman sat in that position. Jacob approached his wife and stroked her shoulder. Don't be upset, dear. He will realize he is wrong and apologize to you. I, too, think he's being reckless. I support you. We're not going to let it go, are we? After a minute, Clara took her hands off her face. Yes, we won't let it go. We'll do anything to get that girl out of his life. Ethan heard his mother and father's words, but didn't say anything else to them. Let them do what they want. They won't be able to keep him and Kathy apart. Ethan won't let that happen. Not anymore. Clara and Jacob hadn't brought up Kathy. Ethan and Kathy continued to date. Another month passed. Ethan planned to propose to his girlfriend. He prepared carefully, bought a beautiful, expensive ring, and made a reservation at a restaurant. He wanted everything to be beautiful. He wanted to surprise Kathy, but it was not destined to come true. There was an accident. Ethan was in a big hurry to get to Cleary's date. His car was in for repairs, so he called a cab. He told the cab driver that he would pay extra if he could get him to Kathy's meeting place on time. It was raining heavily. The cab driver accelerated too fast and lost control. The car swerved into the oncoming traffic, and there was a terrible accident. Ethan was lucky to be alive. The driver died at the scene. Ethan's injuries were severe. He was taken by ambulance to the hospital. The guy did not regain consciousness. When his parents arrived at the hospital, they were told that he had fallen into a coma. His condition was serious. Ethan was in intensive care, in a coma. The boy had been there for 2 months. He was in stable condition. His parents came to see him every day. He underwent several surgeries. The doctors didn't give any guarantees. By the end of the 2nd month, they told the parents to prepare for the worst. The situation could change at any moment. No one could predict anything. Fortunately, things changed for the better. Exactly 2 months later, Ethan regained consciousness. His condition began to improve day by day. 3 days later, his parents were allowed to see him. The first thing Ethan asked Kathy was, "Where's Kathy?" Clara and Jacob looked at each other. Then Ethan's mom said, "Honey, don't worry. You can't worry now. You have to get better. You have serious injuries. Think about your health now. The doctors said you survived by a miracle. Now they say you can recover, but it will take a long time. Please focus on the fact that you need to get better." Ethan stubbornly repeated with difficulty, saying the words, "Mom, where's my Kathy?" "Son, think about you. We've been so worried about you. Mommy cried every night. Look at the way she's slouching, losing weight," said Jacob to his son. Ethan stood his ground. "Where is my Kathy?" Clara sighed and answered her son. "I'm sorry, dear, but you don't have Kathy anymore. What you said happened to her. She died," whispered the boy. Clara lowered her gaze and quietly replied, "This girl came a month after you were in the accident. You said she loved you. I thought she would come on the first day. Your friends came. They knew you were in serious condition. I didn't know your girlfriend's number. I told William and Noah. I thought they'd tell her. I guess they did. But your girlfriend didn't come to you. She came a month later and gave you a letter. I begged her to stay to see you. I thought you'd start all over after she came, but Anna didn't want to. I was almost on my knees begging her not to leave you, but she said she wouldn't come again, and she asked me to give you a letter. Clara took a white envelope out of her purse. Ethan took it with a trembling hand, but his hand immediately fell to the bed. He looked pitifully at his father and mother. Please read it to me. I can about it myself. Read it to me, please. Please. Jacob was embarrassed. Son, shall we postpone it? I beg you, don't think bad thoughts. Let you read this letter when you can. Daddy, please read it. Barely whispered. Ethan, darling, what if it's bad news? You don't have to read it right now. You need to get stronger, and you'll read it yourself, Clara said affectionately. Ethan looked at Dad in silence. Then Jacob sighed and took the letter from his son's hands. With a quick glance at his wife, he carefully opened the envelope. The unnatural poorness of his face told that he was very worried. Taking another look at his son, he doomed himself with a sigh. And I'm sorry you were in an accident. I hope you survive and that you'll be okay. I hope you find your happiness. I'm sorry for what happened. I have to tell you, my feelings for you weren't sincere. There was something missing all the time. I realized what I was missing was my feelings for you. We'll never see each other again, because I met someone else and I loved him sincerely. And now I realize there was no true love between us. My feelings were not true love. I'm leaving you this letter because you're in a coma, and I can't wait to tell you everything in person. I'm passing this letter through your parents because I'm leaving. Don't look for me. We will never meet again. Goodbye. Jacob Reed. Ethan felt so bad that he needed to be injected with a sedative. Clara asked the doctors to keep him sedated for a few days while he recovered. She visited her son daily, had discussions with him, consoled him, telling him that Kathy had done a bad thing. But the heart could not be commanded. If she truly didn't love Ethan, it was a good thing she was finding out now. Before things went too far. After 2 weeks, Ethan had recovered a little, but his gaze was very different. There was a cold emptiness and indifference in it. Ethan would never be the same again. He truly loved Kathy and had not expected such a betrayal from her. Clara and Jacob decided that they needed to restore their son's health abroad. They sent him to Europe and went with him themselves. His past. Life was over. Ethan returned home. A year later, he was almost fully recovered. His parents shelled out a huge amount of money to improve their son's health. Ethan never forgot Kathy. All this time, living in Europe, he thought only of her. He contacted William and Noah. His friends didn't know where the girl was. She had just disappeared. As soon as Ethan returned, he started looking for her. But all his searches were unsuccessful. Ethan called her 1 million times. The number was no longer in service. Then Ethan looked for Christina, but she was also missing. He found out that she had gotten married and left for an unknown destination. There was nothing more he could do. He wanted to explain himself to Kathy so that she could look into his eyes and tell him that she had never loved him, but nothing came of it. The only reminders of his unhappy love were the ring he had bought the girl when he was going to propose and her farewell letter. When Ethan opened his eyes, it was already light. The cat was lying on his lap asleep. Ethan touched his cheeks with his hand. They were wet with tears. The memories from 20 years ago had not gone away. They made Ethan cry with heartache. Those memories were still causing him pain. What normal relationships with other women could we talk about if Ethan still remembered his only lover? I need to forget her. I need to forget everything. I need to live a normal life. Get rid of the weight of the past, Ethan whispered to himself. His voice made the cat stir and stop talking. Ethan stroked the cat's back. Yeah, buddy, that's the way it is. Let's go to bed, he said to the cat. Ethan wiped away his tears and got up from the couch. He headed for the bedroom, and the cat followed him. For the next month, Ethan was very busy. He got a few important clients. He had forgotten about firing the mute courier who had let him down. He'd completely forgotten about it. Ethan landed several lucrative contracts. Life was good. He hadn't seen a woman in a month. He had no time for that. Adriana called him several times the week after their date. Apparently, she realized he wasn't going to call first. She didn't want to miss out on such a lucrative date. But Ethan didn't answer. For a week, she called him, and then the calls stopped. She realized she was out of luck. One day, they invited him to a restaurant opening. He didn't really want to go, but it had been so long since he had entertained and been in society and decided to go to this party. It was a beautiful evening. The restaurant was over the top. Classy, exquisite, the food was delicious and expensive. Ethan had a great time socializing, laughing, having fun, and eating. Delicious. It had been a long time since he had enjoyed such a treat. For the evening, he came without a date, and a few single women took notice of him. One even approached him to make his acquaintance. But Ethan politely steered her away, implying that he didn't need a relationship right now. The woman shrugged disappointedly. When she stepped back, Ethan regretted for a second that he had refused to socialize. She was quite attractive. It was already about 11 o'clock in the evening, but no one was going to leave yet. Ethan was getting very tired of the noise and music. He was about to leave when he suddenly noticed a woman who was staring at him intently. She was standing at the other end of the hall, holding a glass of champagne. The woman was about his age and looked very good. Ethan thought he had seen her somewhere. He smiled at her, but she didn't smile back. Ethan shrugged and walked toward the exit. Something stopped him, just as he was leaving the hall. His intuition told him that he needed to talk to this woman. He turned and looked at her again. She was still looking at him, and then she waved her hand. Ethan felt an electric shock. He remembered who she was. He'd last seen her 20 years ago. She'd changed a lot, but she was definitely Anna. Ethan walked swiftly toward her. As he approached and stopped, the woman said, "Hello, Ethan." Ethan sighed and replied, "Well, hello, Christina." She smiled. She recognized me. Of course she did. You changed, but the look is still the same contemptuous and judgmental one. The woman laughed and tipped her head back. It was Christina, Kathy's best friend. When Ethan recognized her, memories of the distant past came flooding back to him. Some scenes flashed through his brain. He even smiled slightly. It's been so long. I'll be honest, you've changed too. A little older. How long has it been since we last met? 19 or 20 years? Christina asked. Exactly 20. Ethan answered her. You have a good memory. Ethan grinned. How are you, Christina? I was told you got married and moved away, said Ethan to that. Christina grinned. Well, this is the third time I've been married. Hopefully the last. If this marriage is unsuccessful again, I won't take any more chances. It's so tiring, Christina admitted. Ethan laughed. Yes, of course, tiring relationships are always tiring. Not everyone can take it. He did. Christina looked at him carefully. Come on, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you married? Kids, grandkids maybe. No, I'm not married. No kids, no grandkids. Besides, I'm a lonely bird. Your life didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? I'm doing fine. My parents died 7 years ago, left me an inheritance. I have my own successful company. I have time to enjoy life, work, rest, meet, women. I've got all the fun stuff down perfectly, Ethan said. Christina shook her head reproachfully. You can't fool me. Ethan, I've always seen right through you. They exchanged a few more sentences. Then Ethan left. He had already said goodbye to Christina and turned to head for the exit. Suddenly she spoke. You're a bad man, Ethan, a very bad man. I'm glad you're single. People like you don't deserve a family. Ethan slowly turned to her and asked quietly, have you always treated me like this? Have you? Only I never understood why. Why do you hate me? It's been so many years and you're still writing with bile. Christina, you can't grow old fast like that. You can't do what you do. And don't take it out on me. I've done nothing wrong in my life. What I think of you is my personal opinion. As it turned out, it was correct. Christina parried. Ethan frowned. What are you talking about? Why do you make it sound like I've done something terrible? What do you think I did? Christina asked in surprise. Do you think you did? Christina shifted her eyebrows and walked in quietly. Yes, you've done a lot of bad things, but the worst thing you did was dumping my friend. Kathy barely got over it. How could you do that to her? She trusted you. You left her pregnant. That's so low. I'll never forgive you for that. Ethan turned pale. What? What did you say? Say that again. I didn't understand you. What's there to understand? Did you hear everything I said? Pregnant. Kathy was pregnant. It was time for Christina to be surprised. What, you didn't know? Oh, don't lie to me. You had to know. Your parents knew everything. Did they tell Kathy what you knew about the baby? They made it clear that you didn't want to see her and you didn't want the baby. What? My parents staggered. Christina startled, grabbing his elbow. Jesus, you didn't know. You're lying about everything. I didn't leave her. She left me. She left my parents a letter saying she'd left me for someone else, saying she never loved me, that everything between us wasn't real. I was in a coma. She came back a month later and gave the letter to my parents, but she didn't even want to see me. She didn't want to wait for me. Not even to check up on me to commemorate our relationship. She met someone and married him. Why are you here now? You're lying to me. Christina stared at Ethan in amazement. What are you talking about? Kathy never met anyone. She had no one. You were the only one she loved. Ethan, none of this is true. You're talking such nonsense. It wasn't like that. I don't know what letter you're talking about. Kathy didn't write you any letters. What makes you think that? Wait a minute. Who told you that? Did you see this letter in person? She asked me. Yes, I held it in my hands. I still have it. I keep it just like the ring I wanted to give her when I asked for her hand. He replied quietly. Christina groaned and closed her eyes. God, what a nightmare. Ethan took Christina's hand and squeezed it tightly. Tell me everything you know. And Christina did. When Ethan had been in the accident, Kathy didn't find out until a few days later. She got a call from William. She rushed to the hospital, but she was disappointed. She wanted to get through to the guy, but only close relatives were allowed to see him, and she was nothing to him. Kathy was met by Ethan's parents. The girl tearfully begged, let her go to Ethan. But Clara was adamant. No, you're not going to see him. You'll never see him again. But why do I want to see him? I want to touch him. It'll help him come to his senses. We love each other so much. Our love will overcome all obstacles. I believe that, Kathy said. Clara and Jacob looked at each other. Then Ethan's mom said firmly, Ethan doesn't love you. When they brought him to the hospital, he was still conscious, and he told us not to let you see him. Said he didn't love you and didn't want to see you. Kathy was shocked at what she heard. She could not believe that Ethan could say such a thing. For 2 months, she went to the hospital every day. She already knew she was pregnant. When the 2 months were up, she confessed it to his parents. She firmly told her Ethan was coming around for a while. We told him about you and the baby. He told me to tell you not to come back with the baby. Do whatever you want. You can get rid of it. You want to have the baby? He doesn't care. Neither do we. We'll never recognize him. I advise you not to come again. And if you come again, I'll call the police and tell them you're blackmailing my son. Go away. Don't show up again, or you'll regret it. Clara replied. Kathy was devastated. She didn't think Clara was lying. It was too true what she said. Did he not love her at all? He'd come to his senses and didn't want to see her. Kathy called many times, but his phone was off. Apparently, he really didn't want to talk to her. Christina had a hard time bringing Kathy to her senses. The girl wanted to kill herself. Christina offered so much effort to prevent this from happening. Kathy decided to keep the child and live for him. If the child's father didn't want to see her anymore, if he never loved her, then that was the way it had to be. And she still had a piece of the man she loved, the fruit of their love, albeit imaginary. But she loved Ethan for real. And Kathy had no intention of getting rid of the child. She quickly sold the apartment to her grandmother and moved to the country. A few months later, Christina got married and left town. The trail of both girls was lost. Kathy struggled to live in the village. She suffered a great deal from the fact that she and Ethan had separated. There was a child growing inside her. She moved like a zombie, unable to see or hear anyone. Only when her stomach touched, stroking it on her face, a smile played across her face. Kathy had a son. She completely immersed herself in taking care of the baby. He was everything to her. When he was born, it was as if she was born again, as if she had forgotten. A past life crossed out everything that had gone before. She decided to move on with her life for the sake of the baby. Her son was already 6 months old. Kathy often went for walks with him, and one day the wheel on her stroller broke. She tried to fix it for a long time, but nothing worked. Her son cried. The stroller wouldn't go. Kathy stood there crying. Mason walked by. "Do you need help?" he asked Kathy. The girl couldn't say a word, just nodded and pointed to the stroller. Mason was a little older than Kathy. He'd noticed the girl from the moment she moved in. He liked her a lot, but what put him off was her condition. She seemed so unreachably unhappy. He was just afraid to even talk to her. Mason lived across the street from Kathy. He was her neighbor. "I'll help you now, don't worry. Take the baby in your arms. Let her calm down. I'll see what's wrong with the tire," he said. Kathy took her son in her arms from the fast rocking. The baby calmed down and fell asleep. Mason was able to fix the wheel on the stroller in 10 minutes, then walked her home. When saying goodbye, Kathy said, "Thank you so much. You are my savior." "I can't thank you enough." Mason smiled. "But I do. You can go out with me to the river. That will be your thanks." Kathy looked at her son in the stroller. She wanted to say no right away, but when she saw Mason smiling, she realized she had to stop shunning people. She was only making things worse for herself. "I'd go with you, but I don't have anyone to leave my son with," she said. Mason smiled even wider. "What's the problem?" "I'll take you out on a date with my son." "Okay," Kathy replied, confused. "Well, that's great. Then I'll pick you up tomorrow." "In the morning." "In the morning." A date in the morning. Kathy was surprised. "Yes, we already have an unusual date." "Until tomorrow," replied Artyom. So they started dating. Artyom liked Kathy's boy as his own. Kathy liked him very much. She didn't love him, but she treated him very well and saw that Mason loved her. He was ready to lay the whole world at her feet. Kathy could feel it. When he offered her his hand in marriage, she accepted at once. What's the use of looking for love if you've already been burned? Burned. It was enough to last a lifetime. She doesn't believe in love anymore and doesn't want to love anyone. She'd rather be loved. She'll love her son. Mason and Kathy got married. They were happy in their own way. Mason raised the boy as his own son. The child grew to love him. However, all of Kathy's worries were not in vain. The child was born weak. He was often sick. But the most important thing was discovered when he was 3 years old. Kathy waited a long time for her boy to speak. And then she began to sound the alarm. The doctors said he would have to speak eventually, but her son's speech never came out. Everyone thought the child would grow up to be inadequate, but he grew up to be a smart boy. Graduated from high school with honors. Kathy was very proud of him. Later, "Just Ethan, tell me where she is. I wanted to see her. I want to see my son," he told Christina. Christina shook her head sadly and looked sadly at Ethan. Then she touched his hand. "I'm sorry. You won't be able to see her again. She died a few months ago. They buried her in the village. Artyom died a few years ago, an accident. He drowned in the river. After his death, Kathy was not herself. She was very lonely. She realized that she loved her husband. Without him, she was very ill and fell seriously ill. My son is still there?" Ethan asked. Christina shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know where your son is. Maybe he's living there, or maybe he's gone. I don't know. Can you give me an address?" "What village is this?" "Where is Kathy buried?" Christina told him the name of the village. Ethan turned to leave. Christina spoke after him. "I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry about what happened. I thought it was all your fault. But it was all a terrible mistake. A terrible misunderstanding has torn you two apart. I'm so sorry for you." "Kathy and your son too," Christina said. Ethan sighed and nodded. Then he headed swiftly for the exit. When he got home, he went straight to his office. In a secret drawer, he kept the ring and the letter Kathy had supposedly written. Taking out the ring, he placed it on his desk. Then he unfolded the letters. With trembling hands, he held the letter, reading it over and over, then put it back on the table. Was it really all his parents? How could they do this to him? How could they do this to Kathy? It was so horrible, so low, so cruel. Ethan remembered how then years later his parents kept telling him that it was time to get married. They wanted grandchildren. It turns out they knew Kathy was pregnant, knew they had a grandson or granddaughter, and they demanded that Ethan find a wife. Yes, they themselves had given up on the one girl who could have made their son happy. Ethan sat back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. What cruelty? It was his parents' fault he had lost his only lover. All 20 years of it. He believed Kathy had abandoned him. How painful, how cruel. They didn't deserve this. Kathy spent all those years thinking he'd left her. She was miserable, lonely. Ethan couldn't do anything to help her. His heart was breaking with pain. And his son. God, he had a son. And he was only now finding out about it. Ethan cried like a boy. The next morning, he drove to the cemetery. Standing at his parents' grave, he was silent. He was silent for about 15 minutes, looking from his father's grave to his mother's. And then he said, "I have nothing to say to you. You are responsible for my being unhappy all my life. I cannot say anything to you because you are no longer alive. And I don't know what I would say if you were still alive. I just don't know what you did. It's horrible. You don't forget things like that." He didn't say anything else, and he left. A few hours later, Benjamin was driving him back to the village. All the way, Ethan looked at his watch every 5 minutes. It seemed to him that they had been traveling forever. He couldn't wait to see the house where his son lived and grew up. When they arrived, Benjamin easily found the needed address. They pulled up in front of a neat little house. Ethan got out of the car and leaned against the small hedge. His heart was beating like crazy. A dog was barking exhaustedly in the yard, but no one came out to quiet her. Ethan stood there for about 5 minutes. The dog was still barking. Finally, a neighbor came out. "Why are you standing there? Who do you want?" "Hello." Ethan realized he didn't even know his son's name. So shocked by the news, he didn't even ask Christina. "I need Ethan again." And then the neighbor answered, "Do you need him, Liam? He's not home. He'd be out by now. The dog's out, so the whole street can hear." "What can I tell him?" "Liam. His son's name is Liam." Ethan felt a certain excitement. Was there something familiar about the name? "No, there's nothing to tell him. I'll come back later." Ethan answered a little later and went to the car. He got into the car and said to the driver, Benjamin, "Look on the navigator. Where is the village cemetery?" The driver found the cemetery quite quickly, except where exactly Kathy was buried. Ethan didn't know. "Sweetheart, how do I find you? Tell me," Ethan whispered quietly, looking up. Benjamin looked at his boss with interest. He didn't understand what was going on. Why had Ethan come to this wilderness? Who was he looking for in the old cemetery? Ethan sighed and decided that he needed to look for where the graves had been buried recently. That was probably the place to start from. He began to wander down the path in different directions, but the dates of death on all the graves were too old. He wandered around the cemetery for about 15 minutes, and then he saw an old grandfather up ahead. He approached him closer and politely asked, "Hello, can you tell me where in this cemetery? People buried a few months ago. It's my first time here. I don't know which side to approach." The old man looked at him with interest. "You're not from around here. I've never seen you here before." Ethan sighed irritably. "Of course I'm not from here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking you anything. Will you give me a clue?" The old man stared at him for a few moments, saying nothing in response. Ethan decided he was in over his head. He turned and walked away. Then he heard the old man's voice behind him. "You are unhappy, my son, and have been for a long time. But it will pass. I see that soon it will pass. Everything will get better, and you will find the one you are looking for. This man needs you very much. You both need each other." Ethan turned to the old man and asked in amazement, Who needs me?" "The one you are looking for." Then the old man waved his hand to the side and said, "Start there. Over there is the end of the cemetery, where people are buried now. I'm sure you'll find what you're looking for." The old man went on his way. Ethan watched him for a few minutes. Then he walked in the direction the old man had pointed him. 5 minutes later, he found himself at the end of the cemetery. Yes, indeed, people had been buried here recently. There must be a Kathy somewhere. He began to look through all the graves and suddenly felt someone looking at him. He looked around, but he only saw the guy in front of him with his back to him. This guy was standing next to a grave. There was no monument there. There was just a mound with a few wreaths on it. Ethan felt his heart pounding harder. He slowly walked towards the guy. When he got close to him, he looked at the mound of wreaths. It was Kathy's grave. Oh my God, so that's the guy. And that guy turned around. Ethan stared at him in amazement. Standing in front of him was his former co-worker Liam, the mute courier. How is this possible? It's impossible. Jesus was all Ethan could manage to mutter. Liam looked at his former boss. He didn't understand what he was doing here, how he found him. Had he decided to sue him, or had he reported him to the police? And now they were looking for him. Why had the boss come to see him on his own? Liam fearfully stretched his arm forward and shook his head. You're Kathy's son," Ethan said quietly. Liam frowned. He realized Ethan was here for another reason. Liam stared tensely into the face of his former boss. He realized that something strange was going on, but he couldn't figure out what. Then Liam pulled out his cell phone. He typed something. Then he showed the phone to Ethan. He realized the guy was trying to talk to him. "How do you know my mother?" Ethan read it. He sighed and opened his mouth but couldn't get a word out. How to explain to him that he was his son? He treated the guy so badly. Fired him before he'd even gotten to the bottom of it. Somehow Ethan was sure now that Liam hadn't set him up or taken him. He was the paperwork that had caused Ethan to lose an important client. Liam lowered his hand with the phone and then raised it again and shoved it in Ethan's face. "How do I know your mother?" Ethan muttered. Liam nodded. "I am her. We loved each other over 20 years ago. By some fatal accident, we broke up. I tried to find her, but I couldn't, and now I have. But it's too late." Liam wrote something on his phone again. "Why was I looking for her?" "Because I still love her," Ethan replied. And then Liam's face changed. He took a step back and shook his head. Ethan realized that the boy had figured out who he was. Liam extended the index finger of his right hand forward. He jabbed a finger at Ethan's shoulder and then touched his own chest with the same finger. Ethan nodded, "Yes, I'm your father. Your birth father." Liam's face twisted in a grimace of pain. He turned away from Ethan and fell to his knees in front of his mother's grave. He covered his face with his hands and swayed from side to side. "I didn't know you existed. All these years I didn't know. It just so happened that there were people who didn't want Kathy and I to be together. They didn't want me to marry your mom. They made it so we lost each other. I didn't know she was pregnant. I only found out yesterday. Your mother's friend told me." Liam raised his head. He took out his phone again and typed something, then held the phone out to Ethan. "Yes, it was Christina. She told me about you. I met her by chance yesterday. I haven't seen her in 20 years. Liam typed the next message. "She knew who my birth father was." "Why she didn't tell me," read Ethan. "Because she thought I abandoned your mother. But I didn't. We were separated. We each had our own truth. Your mother never found out. She didn't have time to find out. But I did. I knew you existed. Forgive me. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. 20 years ago, I dreamed of marrying your mother. I loved her more than anyone in the world. Then I had an accident and was in a coma. And when I woke up, I couldn't find her. They told me she'd left me, gave me a fake letter. I looked for Kathy, but I couldn't find her. It was only yesterday that I found out what happened to her and what I have. All my life I have been tormented by believing that your mother had abandoned me. But I continued to love her and never got to start a family. I have no one, no wife, no children. There were only memories of your mother. Those were the best memories. Until we lost each other. You have no idea how much I loved your mother. She was, and always will be the person I gave my heart to. I wanted to marry her so badly. I wanted to cherish her and cherish her and cherish her. I wanted to make her the happiest I could be. But as it happens, my parents didn't want that. They were the reason we broke up. They deceived me and they deceived her. Unfortunately, nothing can be undone. And even to them I can't say anything because they are not alive. Liam listened to his father. What an incredible and terrible coincidence. The man who had fired him was his father. Just impossible. I knew it was true. Ethan couldn't lie. He knew about Christina. It's unbelievable. All his life, Christina knew about his father, and his mom never told him anything. He never questioned her. He had asked a few times, but he saw that those questions made his mother uncomfortable. She must have loved him too until the day she died. The strange longing never disappeared from her eyes. Yes, with Mason she was happy in her own way, but probably not as happy as she was with Ethan. Liam just didn't see his mother any differently. Yes, of his coming into the world, but felt that his mother had some secret that caused her incredible pain. Ethan was her secret. I'm really sorry I fired you. You really didn't touch those documents. That's what Ethan said suddenly, and Liam shook his head. I apologize. I was just being a bossy boss. I forgot that I have to remain human in every situation. Have to remain human. Liam sighed and closed his eyes. I understand if you don't want to see me anymore. You know, I'm very happy that I have a son, so it wasn't all for nothing. At least your mother was happy because she had you. If you want, I'll never get in your way again. Just give me a few minutes. I want to say goodbye to your mother. I just need a couple minutes. Liam nodded and rose from his knees. He walked back a few steps. Ethan knelt in front of the grave. He looked carefully at the picture that was attached to the wooden cross. Yes, that was his Kathy. Grown up, but just as beautiful. God, how beautiful was she? 20 years hadn't spoiled her at all. Just her eyes. She had very sad eyes. Their separation caused them both unbearable pain. Nothing could be changed. Even if Ethan went back in time, now he couldn't change anything. He was in a coma. I'm sorry. Darling, I'm sorry. My only love. You raised a beautiful son. Our son. I'm so sorry I never got to see you. I couldn't explain what happened then. If only we had met. Forgive me. Sleep well, my love, Ethan whispered. Liam heard every word he said. He felt tears come to his eyes. This was his father. Such an influential and intelligent man running a large firm. Garrick had always liked him when he was still working as a courier. He looked at his boss and dreamed that he would one day be like him. But those were just dreams. Ethan stood up, said goodbye to Kathy, and walked over to Liam. I should probably get going. Do you want a ride home? Ethan asked. Liam frowned and then nodded. Ethan was very surprised. He was sure his son wouldn't want to hang out with him. When Ethan and some guy approached the car, Benjamin was very surprised. That's their former delivery guy. Not my boyfriend. What's he doing here? Ethan opened the door, let his son in, and got in. Take us back to that first house, Ethan commanded. When they pulled up, Ethan got out of the car, followed by Liam. Ethan tried to keep his cool. He held out his palm to his son and said, "All right, I'll go." Liam did not give him his hand. He stared into his father's eyes and then pulled out his phone and texted just one phrase, "Maybe you can come visit me?" Ethan felt a maddening joy that took over every cell in his body. Did this really mean that his son wanted to keep in touch with him? Did it really mean that he wanted to be his son? Of course, I would love to come visit you. Liam didn't hold a grudge against his father. He forgave him. Ethan publicly recognized him as his son. Everyone around him was shocked. They didn't understand where this guy had come from. No one knew their history. Liam moved back to the city to live with his father. Thanks to Ethan, I went to university. His money opened up that road for him. The boy remembered his dream. His father was willing to do anything for him. But what Ethan cherished most of all was his relationship with his son. His lack of ability to speak didn't bother him at all. Ethan had quickly learned to speak the language of the deaf-mute, and he and his son now communicated freely. Ethan put a monument on Kathy's grave. He wanted to order a fancy pedestal, but Liam was against it. He claimed that his mother would not have liked it. When Ethan ordered a customized monument, it was a nice, modest, but no less chic monument. When it was installed, Ethan arrived at the cemetery. He brought something else he wanted to leave on the grave. He sat on a bench for half an hour, mentally dialoguing with his beloved, and when he was about to leave, he took a small box out of his pocket, opened it, and took out a ring. It was the same ring he bought when he was 20, bought when he wanted to propose to her. Something he kept it for all these years. Now Ethan knew why he had to give it to the person it was meant for. Ethan took the small trowel he had brought with him and dug a hole and put the ring in it. It is yours to keep forever. With these words, he buried the hole and placed a bouquet of roses on top. After standing there a few more minutes, he said goodbye to his beloved and went to his car. Thanks to Kathy, his life now had new colors. She had given him a son. Even after 20 years, he accepted her gift, a gift from heaven.